and welcome to the first roundtable of the Nick Rodriguez podcast. I am so thankful and happy to have Haley Clark, Maya McClendon, and Rod Symba join us today. We are so excited to do this conversation with you, and we really feel that these conversations in sports are really important. And these are conversations that are important to not only myself and to these people that I have on this panel, but to you guys as an audience. You guys have spoken out that you want this kind of conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and let everybody introduce themselves, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name's Rod Symba, music producer with Regulators Regime and also a former college football player at Cheyney University.
Hi, everyone. My name is mayamcclendon. I'm a former volleyball player from the University of Louisville and Arizona State. I'm also the founder of Sports Metaphor and the Timeout app, which is a mental health app for athletes.
Hey, everybody. I'm Nick Rodriguez, the host of the Nick Rodriguez podcast, and I graduated from the College of Charleston.
Hey, y'all. I'm Haley Clark. I'm a former women's basketball athlete from the University of Georgia. I'm currently a financial analyst at a company called Westrock.
Well, thank you so much. Rod, can you go ahead and get us started, please?
Oh, yes, definitely. A subject that is near and dear to me is that often as minority athletes, we're priced out of certain sports at a very early age. For instance, there are certain sports that there's not a huge minority presence in. We have golf, tennis, and gymnastics. Each of those cost generally about $4,000 at the base to become good at, to practice at, to make something, to make that your main sport. All right. We have the average Black household in the city of Atlanta brings in about $47,000 combined. That's not including taxes. So you're talking less than $2,000 a month. All right. So I feel as though that a lot of minority athletes were not given the opportunity to explore all the sports that we can. For instance, we have 3 sports here online right now. We have football, volleyball, and basketball. Those are 3 sports where you just need a ball, a net, and some sort of goal to practice. These other sports, you need all types of equipment. You have to pay for hotel expenses, things of that nature. I feel that a lot of times we're put at a disadvantage as far as to casting our net wide enough. And I think that's definitely something that society needs to take a deeper look at.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd like to chime in at this point. I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
I can speak on behalf of what's going on in Louisville and what has always gone on in Louisville in terms of the availability of certain sports in different areas of the city. The closer you get to the suburbs, the more you see like natatoriums and golf clubs and tennis clubs. And most times you have to have a membership and don't see as much representation, not as influence to participate in those sports. And so I'll say that I can really understand that, especially with our volleyball clubs. Like the nicest clubs are probably hard to get to and not affordable for inner city kids.
That's so interesting too, because I've never thought about it. Obviously, it's something that we look and we realize and we overlook it as the norm. But that's something I've never even thought about until this roundtable talk, actually. So my thought or my question for you, Rod, is what do you suggest, or what are some things that you think could be done or implemented like in communities to make this less of an issue?
I believe that we as a people, we as a society, folks that have accomplished things in these sports should definitely band together to be able to make these a little bit more accessible. We have gold medalists out there. We have folks with a lot of different resources that could bring these sports to the inner city. We don't see it as often because it's like you're saying, it is an afterthought. We just think, hey, these are sports that we love. These are sports that we play. But when you think about it, these are sports that we were kind of pigeonholed into.
Right. Yeah. We're picking from a smaller bucket per se.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to kind of jump in here too. I think, educating myself on that topic and kind of learning, as Haley was saying, how can we do better? How can we provide those opportunities for kids too? Because these are kids, like we're saying, like shouldn't they have the opportunity to play those other sports as well?
I'd also like to add, like, I'm always about paying it forward. My sister and I, we college volleyball, and we come back and we can have camps now that we're not college athletes, and we can set our own prices and we can choose the locations of where we want these camps. So
Right.
Paying it forward, I think, is so important, especially like you said, gold medalists and basketball players that have gone pro. There's just a lot of opportunities to own something and control the narrative.
Yeah, that's awesome too to think about. So like the Simone Biles or like the Gabby Douglases of the world who
Right.
came up with not many Black little girls doing gymnastics with them. That I wonder if that's ever been a thought for them. Like, let me go back and pull some of these little Black girls out of inner cities or out of lower income homes and give them the opportunities that I had so that they can be as successful as I was.
Definitely.
Yeah, go ahead, Rod. I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to say that I can imagine everyone on this conference has a cousin that can knock off about 5 back handsprings without even thinking about it.
Yeah,
Right.
You know, but they're never given the opportunity to harness these abilities in a gymnastic setting.
No,
I mean, you guys are talking about that because I actually played gymnastics for 13 years. It was my daycare. Like, I didn't see anyone that looked like me that played, but I needed to get all the energy out and jump in the pits and stuff. But again, like, I didn't see a Gabby Douglas when I was participating. I just happened to come about it out of coincidence. But the point is, like, that representation means everything.
Yeah, I think you guys are nailing it right on the head. Representation is such a big item. I know when we had Dr. Jen Welter on the show, she was the first female to coach the NFL. I was asking her, it's just like, it's interesting, Haley, when you were bringing up Gabby Douglas and Simone Biles, how it's like a different dynamic almost, because being Dr. Jen Welter or Gabby Douglas, there was no one really before them, so it's like, it's almost a different kind of responsibility almost, but not in a bad way. They just carry a different kind of honor, really. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, do we have any other comments or anything else we want to add to this conversation?
I think yes, there's a deeper impact than just the social economic parts of this, right? You have the deeper impact is that, for instance, because I was not able to experience these different sports, I felt as though I was almost having an identity crisis by middle school. I felt as though because I was playing football, I had to be a certain way. I had to act a certain way in school, things of that nature. It impacts even down to the personality because all of us athletes, we can definitely tell you that sometimes in a sport you don't get to choose your own personality. A lot of times events, coaches, situations kind of choose that for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's also interesting to think about too, because kind of like we were talking about earlier about how we overlook those types of things, like per se, for you said identity crisis. We think, okay, well, Black kids or Black boys, they play football and this is how they act. Whereas white kids, they play golf and this is how they act. But essentially it's turned out that way because the resources haven't been available to Black kids. So now they're kind of restricted or confined to a sport and identity where who knows, maybe this Black kid's personality and talents actually fit better to golf, or even a white kid's abilities per se fit better to football. And it's just the fact that, like you said, they've been priced out of intermixing. So who knows?
Right. And I think Tiger Woods is kind of like a great example of that, right? I mean, because he was able to, I don't know his upbringing as much, but obviously being one of the all-time greatest golfers really made the sport, attractive. And I know it's not all about being attractive. It's the accessibility to afford the clubs. And like you're saying, Rod, affording golf clubs versus, a basketball or something like that is crazy expenses. I mean, You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's like, so Tiger Woods really changed the game of golf because he just made it different. Am I wrong here, or is that something that is, I guess, on the right track?
Yeah. Rod, did you have something?
Oh yes, yes, definitely right on that. It's and going back to representation, you know, it's all about once you see someone that looks like you do something, it then becomes an available option to you, and that just needs to happen more. And the leaders in those professions, this is their call to action. They should definitely make it more available to people that look like them.
And if you think about it, like in most inner cities or even different communities, there's lots of community centers, and a lot of times those centers get grants and things like that and money to support the centers and bring activities. So why aren't these centers bringing in the activities for the sports that kids are priced out of, instead of bringing in buying more basketballs or buying more footballs or buying more volleyballs? You know what I mean? Like, why aren't they doing that as well so that they can get that exposure to those sports too?
Absolutely. Maya, do you have anything to add before we move on to our next subject?
I was just, as everyone was speaking, I was trying to kind of think in my head how much of this limitation of exploration within sports is due to covert prejudice, not just with race, but maybe sports like that might be a little bit more feminine that men might be interested in. That's still prejudice within itself. I was thinking, like, how black male figure skaters have I seen? That's a sport. And
That's true.
People might feel weird about it, but that's an opportunity. That's who says a black male can't enjoy that and still maintain masculinity, but you just don't see it. And there's so much covert prejudice in so many different facets that it's like that's another opportunity cut off. And like you said, like, it's culture, it's personality. That's not your personality if you're so bogged down by prejudice.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good point.
How can we change that, Maya? How can we be? I think you make an excellent point. What if you do want to be, that figure skater, or you want to play tennis, or even if you do want to play football? How can we change the society mindset one step at a time? Because obviously, it's going to take a long time to make these changes, but these conversations are extremely important because with conversations, you can actually get change done. So how can we, begin to, make that change in your eyes, or first steps, I guess?
Absolutely. Whenever we talk about prejudice, it's something that we always have to go back to. This is a systemic issue. This is something that's really embedded into so many foundations of our country, of society, at this point, humanity. So it really is an untangling of a lot of different strings that have to come from all angles. Of course, representation plays into it and having the conversations, but really it's about people stepping out of their comfort zones and doing things that are extremely uncomfortable, whatever that looks like. And I honestly think it is really paying it forward. In a lot of things that are happening right now with the NCAA, it's going to take coaches, administrators, parents. It's going to take everyone to make those changes. And so, again, when we're talking about deep-rooted prejudice, it has to come from all angles.
I also think, kind of like she was saying, like, that would be more so for like the near term. I think it'll be a lot harder to do in the near term, but I think maybe for future generations, like, it starts with us. It starts like anything else. Everything starts at home. What you learn at home, what your parents are teaching you, what your mentors are teaching you when you're a kid. So if our generation, we're teaching our kid or we're teaching our son, hey son, it's okay to figure skate, Kate. If we have the money, we'll put you in figure skating. You can still do that and still be a man. You know what I mean? It starts at home and at the root. And from there grows a new generation of kids and eventually adults where those norms aren't really the norms anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's starting to change too. If we starting to talk about masculinity, and I think Rod, you can kind of jump in here too, but I think masculinity, I think for a long time was always be tough, men don't cry, such and such, we're big, strong, and all this sort of stuff, which is great. There's a great qualities, but just because you cry or, certain other things doesn't make you lesser than, the next person.
I have a lot to say about masculinity.
Let's get it. Yeah, whatever you got.
There is, sports in general has an extremely toxic undertone of masculinity, not just with men, but with women. Like this, be tough, rub some dirt in it, you're fine culture. Like it's with women too. Like any woman who wants to play sports is a tomboy. Why is that the lingo we're using? And I think that, again, when I talk about my topic, it really is toxic masculinity, and it's not mutually exclusive to men. And I think that's really important to note.
Well said.
Well, if no one has anything else to add, we'll go ahead and move on to our next segment, which is featuring Maya.
So my topic is mental health maintenance as it pertains to COVID, the social justice movement right now, and the financial crisis we're in. Just a little bit of background. I was a captain of 2 different teams. I transferred, and during my experience, it really stuck out to me how much of a problem mental health was. I got my degree in pre-med psychology. It wasn't until after I graduated it really stuck to me how underserved all athletes, and particularly minority athletes, were in terms of psychological, biopsychosocial health in general, like all of it together and holistically. That encouraged me and influenced me to start my own thing on the side. But what I really wanted to talk about was, we're obviously going through a lot right now. Everyone's processing it differently. You're seeing the NCAA step up, you're seeing the NBA step up, and everyone trying to maintain the integrity of sport. What we're not addressing directly is how it's really affecting us psychologically, immediately and the long term. I think we're just now having this conversation where we're barely getting over stigma, which has been within our sports for decades. But having actionable plans that put athletes first, I think, is the biggest barrier. I believe that these institutions have a corporate social responsibility to prioritize psychological health as much as physical health. And it just shows how the fact that especially college football players are forced to play this next season for monetary issues, we're not even where we need to be on a physical standpoint. So I really think that NCAA is doing something. They've published a couple things, like a couple of studies. They have their mental health daily strategies that they've posted, but I've really seen a lot of leadership among athletes themselves, talking about their self-care routine, having and seeking the resources needed. But I just wanted to kind of bring that up. I know we all have our own story of how mental health has affected us as an athlete, but overcoming stigma, it's like, what can we do actionable?
That's really interesting. I think a key of what you said is the responsibility of the institutions being somewhat of an intermingle of a corporate, I guess, platform, or that's what their focus is. Because if you think about it, when we're playing at a university, but at the end of the day, it's a business. They have to make money. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, if the products or the athletes are producing, who what is there to invest into their mental health? They're producing. Right. They're going out there, they're giving us the best product at the highest level possible. So what does mental health really matter to those who are higher up outside of the athletes? So I think that's really, really good.
Definitely. To piggyback off of that, the mental health aspect of this is more prevalent, especially with COVID going on, is because when you're away from your teammates, and we can all admit that when you're on a team, there's a lot of groupthink that happens, a lot of group thoughts. A lot of times, not everyone's thinking for themselves. You're thinking for the good of the team. Mm-hmm. And now that you have these athletes away from their team and they're able to breathe and kind of think for themselves, you're seeing a lot more athletes start to opt out, to start to take care of themselves first. Even bringing this same issue to the pro level. There's a good buddy of mine who's in the NFL now, and he went through an issue with his team. He was having some issues both personally and physically. And he had a way that he could take care of it that would involve him stepping away from the team for a little while. However, the organization told him that it's not in his best interest to do that for the team.
Oh, wow.
They'd rather have him play through whatever was going through when he was outright telling them something was going on. Yeah, right. And the team ended up releasing him. And he was he was very good at his position. So yes, I think that the mental health, taking care of yourself, self-care is definitely becoming more and more prevalent during this time.
Yeah,
I think
I'd like
that's an
to.
interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Maya. Go ahead.
I think it's an interesting point you brought up about in, I guess, social distancing. It kind of breaks up groupthink, and I think that's really interesting because
interesting.
most times, well, studies literally have shown that athletes are more willing to seek peer-to-peer help, and that's how we have protective measures with being in a social structure from depression and anxiety. But in terms of like these movements and the ability to like step away without judgment, it may be influenced by social distancing. I'd love to see some studies of that done, because I don't doubt it at all. There's always a pressure of like, who's watching me, or like,
Right.
it's like a physical presence missing.
Right.
But in terms of like the protective measures, I find it super interesting as well. Like, what's the benefit and the risk associated with distancing?
That's very interesting, and I'd also like to, kind of jump in here and say, you guys all played at an extremely high level. Did you ever feel like, I know Haley kind of mentioned it earlier with it's a business. Did you feel like you could speak out about mental health or other issues, or did it feel like you had to toe the company line?
No, I didn't feel like I could speak out at all. I'll be completely honest with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
You know, especially as far as with mental health, no, especially going through at the college athlete age, you're 19, 20, 21, 22 years old.
Right.
While we may think we're grown adults, we're still very naive about ourselves at that point. And and you always think that, hey, whatever coach says, or however the team is feeling, however the team is moving, that's the way I have to move too. So when I was an athlete and I was going through anything mental, no, I didn't feel comfortable bringing it up at all.
I have to agree. I'm not a shy person, and again, like as a leader, I always preach like there are sources you need help. But when I was going through something personally, I always downplayed it. Always, like no matter what it was, I would be transparent to a point. But even me, like I was the most overt about it. People would not talk about what was going on, and again, that it really stuck out to me when you open up to people and you hear it just kind of like floods out. But It's really hard to get people to that vulnerable space, and they're never going to tell their coach. And I think that's the biggest issue.
Yeah, for me, I would say it was about 50-50. So for my freshman and sophomore year, I would say no. But then by my junior and senior year, fortunately, and I love Georgia for this actually, they started to push mental health more. And luckily we have a good football team, which brings in a lot of revenue, where they had the budget to actually bring a staff in that was focused specifically on mental health, and they'd go around to the teams and they'd set up appointments with individual people, and they put out like brochures, and they do things at the student tutoring center and things like that, to where it was more so of a norm almost by the end of my senior year. But my sophomore and freshman year, I didn't even honestly know what mental health really was. Like most people, especially in the Black community, that's not something that we talk about, so I had no clue what that was until they came in my junior year and said, hey, this is what mental health is. This is what we're going to do to help you guys, and then that's when I started to sit back and evaluate like, man, wow, there are some things that I need to talk to somebody about, or that sometimes I struggle with, and things like that. So fortunately, the end of my career is where I got to see it more and was able to speak out more about it and talk to people.
I have a question for you, Haley.
Yeah.
I would at the University of Louisville, we had 3 mental health providers on staff, which was like amazing. Most only afford about 2. But did you feel like regardless of having those resources available, did you feel like that your coaching staff supported that type of help seeking? Do you think that you could just say it to the team and not feel like you are at any type of competitive disadvantage?
I think year to year, it kind of varied depending on the team dynamic. My coach, Joni Taylor, she was actually all for it. And I think that she noticed the more that some of us got help, the less drama there was on the team, and the more happier people were at practice, and the better we performed at practice, which translated to the games. Right. But in terms of what you're saying, in terms of speaking up in front of our teammates, I think it just depended on how close we were that year. Like, some years we just were like, okay, I don't want anybody to know I'm going to go talk about like confidence or about like depression, you know? So like, there's still till today, I check up with some teammates and they're like, oh yeah, girl, did you not know, like in school, I was seeing a therapist for this. I was like, what? I never knew you were having like suicidal thoughts, you know? So it kind of depended. And some people we did know. So it kind of varied, I think, depending on the relationship with the team. But my coach for sure pushed it, and she was very either confidential or she wasn't about it, depending on what we wanted.
Was it required like by anybody to go see the mental health experts? And Maya, you can jump in too, or is it just kind of as you need?
In my experience and who I've surveyed, it's always as needed.
Okay.
But we had a sports psychologist that would attend practices. Like, she would always show up, she would show her face, and I had a chance to interview her recently and ask how have they improved their model, and it's improved significantly, but it's never been required. It's just always having a familiarity in case of emergency.
Mm-hmm. I think too, something that was interesting they did at the end of my career was, like she said, it was always as you needed, but most of the mental health staff and psychologists we had were white. And you'd find that a lot of people from lower income homes who weren't used to even interacting with white people, they wouldn't go. So they actually ended up bringing on a Black psychologist to have that extra option for those people who weren't comfortable based off of where they've come from, to basically spill out their beans to a white psychologist. So there was like both, which I thought was really awesome that they did that.
Yeah, there's that representation we're talking about too.
Yeah,
definitely.
And I'd just like to jump in for you, Rod. I know you didn't have, one on hand or anything like that, I guess, right? You didn't have a mental health expert or anything on staff?
No, we did not. Being at a smaller Division II school, we didn't really have the resources for that, but also with it being a historically Black college, your outlet was more so a professor or someone that you may have seen as family. There was always that family aspect of HBCU, something that I'm always very thankful for, where while they may not have always had the resources to bring in your professionals, so be it, but they always had someone you could you can speak to. However, I know I said earlier I wasn't comfortable bringing things up within my team is because we had no structure in place for that. Right. But as far as professors, things of that, folks of that nature and that profession, yes, those are definitely folks I could lean on.
And now too, as we talk about this a little more, I'm kind of curious to know this question for you guys, Maya and Rod. So a lot of time, our mental health is also tied to like our spiritual health. And I know that some people or some schools have like chaplains. I know like for us, football and men's basketball had it, but like women's basketball, other sports didn't have it. And like now that I'm older and I'm more spiritually mature, I look back in college and I'm like, dang, I really wish we had somebody to talk to about spirituality and like talk to about Christ and things like that, and about the way I live my life, because a lot of those things tie to my mental health. So I was wondering, did you guys at school have like chaplains or any type of like spiritual leader or anything like
that? Yes, we did. At my school, we had one, a non-denominational type of chaplain. Being where the school is located right outside of Philly, there's a very diverse religious or spiritual population.
Okay.
So therefore, having someone that could come in and speak to that, it was definitely helpful to have.
Mm.
At the University of Louisville, we had a massive FCA following. I mean, it was hundreds of athletes. A lot of people sought help through that avenue. Speaking personally, I've never been that religious, but I'm extremely spiritual. And I definitely would have benefited with a non-denominational situation. I did attend FCA, and it did seem safe. But in terms of like what I needed for mental health specifically, I didn't feel like they could fulfill those needs.
Yeah.
However, they were incredibly intelligent and were able to refer you if they thought that they were unable to do so, which I thought was brilliant. And so happy that they were kind of that like place for people to go to.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is a significant, like, if you weren't Christian, where was your place? You know? So I actually had a question for Rod. Specifically, you were the only one that said you didn't feel like you could talk about it with your teammates, or it just wasn't something that was addressed in terms of mental health. How do you think your team would have responded if you had someone on staff? Or do you think that your team would be open to having those conversations? Or do you think that the stigma amongst Black, or actually just male football players in general, is just too heavy?
I think it's a mix of both. There was a lot of, and I hate to use the term toxic masculinity on the team, but that's exactly what it was. And the same folks that were proprietors of this toxic masculinity, I'm now seeing are kind of searching for their spot in the world without the sport. So would we have benefited from one? Yes, definitely, and after being out of the sport for a few years and being able to see how it affects athletes after the game is over, after your eligibility is up, we would have definitely benefited from that.
I think that's possible to do, or how would you go about implementing that while you're still in it? Because I will also say, once you're out of it, you have like this huge perspective of the world, and like you can see it clearly. But at least for me, when you're in it, you're just like, I don't have time for this, or like, what, you don't see it as much. So in your position, how would you have gone about it, or what would have helped you when you were in?
I think a way that I would have handled it differently, if I could go back, is I would have attempted to be the agent of change, to be the person that kind of steps up and say, hey, this is what's going on with me. I, may need someone to talk to, and to kind of break the ice. With my team, was a very, very thick sheet of ice before you could get to anything emotional or anything of that nature.
What I'm trying to allude to is that sheet of ice. And I know that I have 6 textbooks right here, but they were all written by white men. Mm-hmm. It's going to look different for Black men. You break the ice. And it really does start with conversations like, okay, no, it's not going to be this way. It's going to be this way. And this is how we do it. So I'm trying to get a little bit deeper, but I really think that you're right. It starts with personifying everything and being vulnerable.
Definitely.
Which is not always easy. Being vulnerable is not always easy, especially, I think it's like being in the right group or right setting. I think you guys all, hit on it, is like being comfortable in that group. Whether, we're talking about sports or with your family, with your friends, I think everybody we can point to, needs, or everybody, in general, needs a group that they can feel that they can express their thoughts, their struggles. You don't need to share all of your pains and struggles with every single person, but you do need somebody to help you through those moments, because mental health is a real thing. Mental health is a real thing for athletes. And I know Maya, we talked about it in depth when you came on the show, which I really appreciate because it's a conversation that needs to be more recognized. I think those were your exact words, or around that phrasing, but it does, and I think it's becoming more accepted. But we still have a lot of work to do. I think we still have a lot more progress to do.
I think it really goes back to empathy. I think everything goes back to empathy and humanizing people and saying like part of humanity is vulnerability, and it's okay to be vulnerable. Having that empathy with other people actually like is a benefit. It's not a weakness.
Right.
So I think that's where you got to start.
Absolutely. Does anyone have anything to add to Maya's topic before we move on?
I would say, Maya, for you, like for anyone who's listening to this or or catching up on the podcast later on, what would you say to them, or what would be your word of advice to them, to someone who is not, I guess, keeping up with their mental health or checking in on other people to see how their mental health is? Like, what can they do? Like, what should be their perspective of it? Just anything that you think most people don't know.
Absolutely. Number one would be radical self-care, meaning you can pour from an empty cup, right? Like we've heard about this, especially the previous civil rights movement. I think it's absolutely essential for you to take some time and have some self-reflection as an individual away from your sport. Really finding who you are, what drives you, what makes you happy. Write it down and journal that, because that's your core. Like, don't think about your mom, don't think about your coach, about your teammates. It's not about anyone, and really pay attention to those things. Really value those things. If the more you dedicate yourself to the things that you have defined, the more disciplined you are with those things, the more you will attach to self-love. I really believe that's what self-love is. Self-love equates exactly to mental health and your own mental health. So definitely start by, it's okay to put yourself first. And it's really that you prioritize the things that really, really make you whole.
That's good.
And then, of course, seek help if you need it. You can't do it all.
Right.
I was seeing a sports psychologist, a psychologist. I was like, I was not shy. I was like, who can help me? I'm really tired. Why am I sleeping so much? I was painting and buying candles, but I'm like, I did need help in that journey as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Maya, for sharing your topic, and I guess that means I'm up. Again, my name is Nick. My topic is also mental health as well, actually. Mine is going to be, I guess, my I guess what's the word? My experience and my struggle, I guess, with dealing and coping with mental health, because I think, as we've talked about before, and again, I'll reference you, Mike, because we had you on the show and you were excellent as always. So it was more of I think for me, I'm just learning more about it and learning more about what can lead me down a path that doesn't make you feel very good and very positive. I think, for me, to share something, I guess, personal, or, I have an active mind, I guess, is what they say. So, which is usually a good thing, right? Don't do this, don't do that. You're doing great. Let's do this, whatever. But sometimes when I'm in a bad state of mind, that can almost trick you, right? It can send you down this path that internally is not good for you. And for me, it's figuring out that. It's having a therapist that I see, that I speak to, and she's opened me up to a lot of different things, not just within myself, but within the world, which I encourage, everyone to have a therapist. It doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're learning more, at least in my experience, I've learned a lot more about myself. And now I have the confidence to speak to you guys and kind of share my personal experience. But I think for me, getting in those down moments, they can not be fun, right? But, it's, for me, it's learning how to get out of that. What's a good way to not sleep all day, right? Or notice the signs in yourself. And sometimes it's hard to point that out, and you don't want to recognize it in yourself or say it out loud, because if you say it out loud, then it becomes real, right? So for me, it's recognizing it early, and saying, oh, it's okay to not feel good today, and then figuring out a way to work on those remedies. So I think for me, remedies for me is, being with people sometimes, but sometimes I need to be on my own, right? And I think we've talked about it a lot. There's a lot going on in the world. So it's okay to feel stressed. Some people, aren't working. Some people, the COVID-19, the Black Lives Matter movement. There's just a lot going on in this world, right? Aside from maybe personal things that you're dealing with, right? So it's completely understandable. But I think for me, I'll just speak to, you put too much pressure, on yourself to be perfect all the time. I'm sure you guys as athletes, you guys probably felt, a similar way from time to time. You got to do this so you can start or, meet your expectations and team goals. So for me, I think remedies, going on a walk and recognizing how I can, be okay with it and deal with it. And I think I'm on a right track, but I think, speaking about it really helps me in my life.
Mm-hmm. I think something that was really good that you said was, it's okay not to be okay. I think there's this false idea that we should always be okay and we should always have it together and everything should always be daisies and lilies, and cakes and all of that. But it's okay not to be okay. I think the important part is, okay, I realize I'm not okay. What do I do about it? There was a pastor I heard who said that pain is not always our fault, but healing is our responsibility. So I feel like it's the same thing with not being okay. Sometimes not being okay is not your fault, but making sure you get back to okay, that's your responsibility, for yourself.
Nick, I'm so happy this is your topic too, because I can talk about this all day.
Yes.
But I kind of wanted to get a little bit deeper into this awareness, preventative education. Of course, Haley, you talked about how wonderful Georgia is, and they afford all these resources, but maybe some people listening don't have healthcare or they aren't affiliated with an institution that can afford it. How do you go about educating yourself? When do you know the right time to seek help? And I think that's something that I am personally, it's my mission in what I'm creating, but there's never been a time where there's so much media and education out there for us to learn about what's going on. And I know for me, I thought I was crazy. I really did. I was like, something's wrong with me. So I would Google a bunch of things, all this stuff. And it wasn't until I took a course where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. This is completely normal.
Right.
I wish I had this textbook earlier, but it's about knowing when it's dysfunctional. And really, if I get into technical things in the DSM-5, which is an official diagnosis manual, it's about having a certain amount of symptoms over a certain amount of time. And that's not something maybe a pastor will know or your teammates will know. That's something that you have to say, okay, this has maybe been going on too long. I'm not showering anymore. Someone said something to me. Maybe it's time for me to do a little bit more research and figure out how I can actually go about seeking help. And again, there are so many more free resources that people don't know. And I think that's the biggest disservice is most people are just it's too late for them without them understanding that there are places to find help. So.
Definitely. And also, Nick, you spoke about having an active mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I've found, being another person that has being a person that has an active mind myself, right? A lot of times we're hypersensitive to the things around us. However, even though with us being very sensitive to the things around us, we'll find ourselves going back to doing things that aren't necessarily helping us come out of this funk, right? So it's almost like a game you have to play with your mind to say, hey, look, I'm aware that I'm in this dark space. What can I do to break the matrix? A lot of times we fall into the same rituals, the same things whenever we feel a certain way. And sometimes it can be as simple as, hey, taking well, not as simple, but things that you could do to help would be to, hey, take a different way home driving this time. Let me do something that I wouldn't normally do. And sometimes just that break in the matrix gives you that little sliver of light that you may need to move forward from the dark space that you're in.
I think that's That's excellent. I mean, that's a great way to phrase it too. And I think just it's you're right. I mean, changing up your routine a little bit, mixing things up, and everybody is completely different, right? Like what works for you might be different for me, and hey, it might be the same. But that's the kind of the point of this conversation is to open people up. You know, we're not, you know, we don't know everything, right? But each of us has different experiences and different thoughts on all these subject matters, and we're giving our advice and help, you know, to the people listening and to the people in this panel. And I think for me, you know, one thing to add is I think a lot of people that have, you know, that are struggling with mental health or, you know, I think they feel alone, like that they're by themselves, even though they have a supportive family or they have a therapist or they have those teammates or those resources, like you mentioned, Haley. But you're not. I think that's just something that is, at least for me, sometimes you just feel alone because it can be hard to have those conversations with somebody and be vulnerable, right? It's hard to speak out and step out and, you know, okay, here I am, you know, I could really get hurt right now and I'm already kind of in a vulnerable state, you know, but I think after, because when I was younger, I saw one for a little while. And then I hadn't seen one for years, and then I've seen one off and on for a couple of years, and I think it's just really changed the way I think about things. Just, you know, a positive outlook. And there's another person who's on the show, Bridget Case, who's a major mental health advocate. I encourage you actually to, you know, listen to her show after Orange Slices. But, you know, just talking about it, she does this thing where she gets on Instagram Live. I believe she still does this every day and just talks about her day, right? And for her, that's very therapeutic. It's very helpful to, you know, people I think ask questions and, you know, stuff like that. But I think when you see somebody that is labels himself as a mental health advocate, I think it's really cool because it, you know, kind of unites you, right? Because you're like, okay, you know, maybe we don't have to talk about that and get deep because we're not super close, but I can understand that you're going through a struggle that may be similar to mine.
To add, I noticed that you said
I
active.
think too what you said. And, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry. A lot of the language that you guys use, like hypersensitivity or an active mind, I think that's like essential, right? And brought up perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest issue, and I was able to attend the Student Athlete Mental Health Conference in UCLA.
Oh, wow.
And my favorite presentation, I think she was a professor from of Colorado. She said that what's mostly lacking is self-compassion. And like you said, like you learned how to have a positive outlook, but athletes were trained to be like, I suck, I need to be better, I'm crazy, like I'm weak. Like those things are kind of put in our heads. But learning how to reframe that language is like step number one. And like, again, like an active mind and understanding that sometimes the environment isn't fitting what's best for me. And it doesn't mean that it's my fault. It might be my environment that's not right, but it just is what it is. I think self-compassion and language is so important.
I'm sure, you know, I played baseball in high school, you know, but I was never going to make the college team or anything like that. Is that something that you guys felt, you know, because there's always those stories about, you know, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, you know, who pushed himself, pushed himself, pushed himself. How do you guys, you know, give it, like, advice would you give, or how do you, you know, give that compassion and love to yourself, but also push yourself at the same time? Because, like you're saying, Maya, a lot of kids, you know, I'm sure at a young age, 8 years old, hey, they want to make the travel team. Hey, you're not good enough. You're not fast enough. It's already in their head at a young age. You know, and let's say they do make the team and they're, you know, 19 or 20, they're in college now. Now that's been in their head for so long. How would you recommend a child or, you know, a college athlete, you know, obviously push and be the best that they can be, but also making sure that they're still loving on themselves?
Right, absolutely. So I think we kind of alluded to the same thing before, which is like it starts in the home. But I think there needs to be a change in culture in general in sports. I think that we actively need to change relationship with failure, because I think like we really equate winning with right. I think if we change our relationship with failure, we can say, okay, failure is essential and rejection is essential for redirection. And so that narrative, it starts in the home. It starts with coaches who are more emotionally intelligent, who have a broader perspective, and also more so valuing like or devaluing milestones and really like making it more purpose driven, if that makes sense. Like winning isn't goal. It really is about processes. So culture.
Definitely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Haley. Sorry
no, it's okay. Go ahead. You might say it.
Oh, what I was going to say was to practice your pivot, and by pivot I mean that whenever you may hit a wall, and I can speak to this from being a music producer, right? I'm in a saturated field, an athlete can be in a saturated field as well. There can be 5 shooting guards on the team. You know, how are you going to surpass this? Once you hit a wall, it's important to pivot, to find out, okay, this is what I am. How can I take what I am and make it to what I want to be? And sometimes you have to redirect your focus, and that does take failure. I can give a little bit of my story with that. As we stated before, I'm a music producer. You can throw a rock out your window and hit about 6 music producers. It's what is going to set you apart even as an athlete. What part of your skills can set you apart from the saturated field that you're in, and work on harnessing those abilities. You may not be the fastest person on a team, but you may have the ability to think through a play before it happens.
For me, I would say, and this is kind of going to touch on a little bit of what I'll talk about more in my section of the roundtable talk, but knowing your identity, when you know who you are and you know what you're worth and you know your value, you don't find that when you don't meet an expectation that you come crashing down. Right. And I'll definitely go deeper into this when we move on to the next session. But when you have that and you know that, okay, I didn't meet an expectation. What's next? Okay, I can set a higher goal. What's next? I'm still who I am, but what's next? Okay, I can stretch for that now. Okay, didn't meet that? Cool. What's next? It doesn't devalue who I am. And like I said, I'll touch on that a lot more in the next session, but I think that's really important too.
I think that's phenomenal. Both of the points that you both made. Because I will personally say I didn't have much of either of those when I was a student athlete. I think I was very detached. In volleyball, you're one of the only Black person on the team. So trying to find your identity as a performer, I was very, very short as a volleyball player. So I practiced my craft. But when it came to personal things and things got a lot harder, what was my identity? And what I thought was me, how long was it being, stepped on and degraded in so many different ways. So I think that's a huge point. And then the practicing your pivot, that's a wonderful saying. I'm going to have to quote you on that.
Writing it down.
I really did write it down. No, but I mean, that's a sports term. You can't go left, pivot and turn right. There's a million ways to make a shot. And if you're harping on how it failed for you in one direction, the game's already over. So I think those are 2 phenomenal points.
Absolutely. Well said. Does anyone have anything else to add in this topic?
I think they're really good. I liked how both of yours and Maya's kind of tied together, back to back. So.
Yeah, that was great. All right, Haley. The last segment is all yours. So, what are you going to talk about today?
Yeah. So, what I wanted to kind of touch on, and I kind of wanted to be a little bit more conversational. So, I'll try to hold my spill not too long. But I just wanted to touch on the transition from sports to life, to the real world, or from being an athlete to being a normal citizen, non-athlete in the world, whether that's post-college or even post-pro, because some people or nobody plays pro for the rest of their life. So I think the major issue lies in like what I was saying, like what is your identity outside of your sport? You know, you're playing your sport for me 16, 17 years, and that's your identity. That's who you are. You're Haley, the point guard, or Haley, the shooting guard, or Haley, the basketball player at Georgia. But then when you graduate, it's like, okay, that's not me anymore, if that makes sense. Or essentially that is me, but that's never only who I was. So I guess for me, I'll go into my short spill. So I kind of want you guys, it says my internet's not stable. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear
you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I want you guys to maybe share kind of your experience too after I go. So for me, it would be graduating and then going into the real world and, okay, I'm not Haley, the basketball player anymore. What am I passionate about outside of basketball? What do I like to do for fun? What kind of people outside of my teammates do I like to hang around? And just kind of trying to find who you are and what you are outside of your sport. Luckily for me, I've been a Christian my whole life, and I was able to find my identity in Christ. Like, okay, without basketball, I'm still a child of God. I'm still valuable. I still have a purpose. He's placed me here for this. He's placed me here for that. But a lot of people even people who do know Christ, they still aren't able to find that identity, and people are lost, for years. Like I have teammates coming up now who are graduating. They're like, whoa, who am I? What do I do? So for example, I would say a short testimony of mine was in a journey that I recently went through. It was a spiritual journey with my religion, with God and things like that. Spending time with God, he revealed to me that I found too much of my value and, like we said, meeting and exceeding expectations. Because for my whole life, that's what I did in basketball. To get to a D1 level, to start, you got to meet or exceed somebody's expectations. So until I kind of spent more time with God and in the Bible and realizing that I am who God says I am, and no matter what person's expectations I meet or don't meet, this be at work, this be with friends, this be with family, as long as I meet the expectations that God has set before me, I'm good. I'm good to go. I can keep it moving, So I think that that's something that while we're playing, we need to know who we are outside of our sport. We need to know what we're passionate about. We need to know what's our purpose, because our purpose isn't here to just play forever, unless we're impacting somebody or something outside of ourselves. We need to know that while we're playing. So I'm interested in knowing what your guys' transition was like from being an athlete to being a former athlete.
I can start here. I would say the transition was me that I actually had to wear regular clothes. I couldn't just wear sweats and flip flops anymore. That was a transition for me. But on a more serious note, through my junior and senior years in college is when I began to, realize, hey, I'm not going pro. What am I going to be doing after this is over? How am I going to identify as a person, as a non-athlete? And one thing I think is really crazy in football in particular is that they groom you to not have that many other interests other than football. If you have interests other than football, it's actually looked at as a detriment to you as an athlete. I've seen folks draft stock fall because they played saxophone, literally because they played saxophone, and it was something that they held to a higher value than football. So for me, finding myself personally cost me relationships with some of my teammates because I wasn't part of the groupthink that we spoke about earlier. Right. While the guys after practice may be doing one thing, I may be in my room studying music theory. For them, that made me not one of the guys. So I had to accept towards the end of my junior year, like, hey, this is who I am. I'm no longer Rodney, the football player. I'm not that. I'm Rod the musician, and this is who I've become comfortable with. So for me, that started pretty early, and to not say that that it didn't cost me a few things. Definitely cost me some relationships. Might even cost me some playing time, to be completely honest with you. But it's something you have to become comfortable with yourself to know that, hey, this sport is not going to last forever. I have to figure out what I'm going to do when this is done.
So my transition out of sports was a mess. We'll just say that. But it's kind of a unique story. Like I said, I transferred. I was offered a 5th-year grad assistant position, and I was planning to get my master's in psychology before med school. But my coach got fired, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, no. Not only have you not prepared for med school, you no longer are able to get this grad position. I had a small window of being able to play pro, but I was just so burnt out. I was like, there's no way I'm going to make it through this. If anything goes wrong, I won't make it mentally. So I made the decision to move on. The difference, I guess, is I have always wanted to be a doctor. That journey has always been encouraged for me. But I think it was because I was a smaller player, I was always like, well, I'm going to be a doctor anyway. So I had that plan B in my heart, in my head from day one, thinking that my transition was going to be seamless. It wasn't. It was the furthest thing from seamless, not only because I had a realization that as an athlete, you have all this confidence from working hard, and then ego starts filling up a bigger space because you're on billboards and all this stuff. Without your ego's left, you don't have the confidence of being an athlete. It's just ego. And Haley, like, I'm not religious, but I'm so spiritual. Everything you said, I was like, that's literally how I think. It might just look a little bit different. I had a spiritual thing that I had to go into and realize, like, something's bigger than me. I have to have that journey of finding my purpose. And so when I decided not to go to med school and start my own business, which is like literally crazy, like what is wrong with me? I had to really put my heart first. And I posted something the other day about how as an athlete, we're trained to do this like monotonous, like brainless work. It's like very like machinery, right? You just tell me what to do. I'll be the best at it. But when you're out of sports, it's like, okay, you can choose to go back into that in the corporate world, or you can have this like freeing, passionate chaos. You have a choice at that point. So choosing that route and realizing, like, if I do something passionate, like music for you, Rod, like I'm choosing to do what drives me, that's bigger than me, versus something that's rooted in vanity and that's like known. Like, I know what's going to happen if I go to I know what's going to happen if I go into a marketing position. But I will say, like, stepping out of my comfort zone and making those sacrifices, this is the first time I've ever felt like I was playing a sport again, this journey and pursuing something unknown. It is so much fun. And it's going to look different for everyone, but that's how my transition has gone.
Yeah, I think too, what was really big that you said is you kind of knew, which I feel like isn't many cases, you kind of knew like, oh, I'm going to be a doctor when I finish. But even then, you know, it doesn't turn out that way. So then it's like, okay, well, you know what now? You know what I mean? So just people, or I think even schools, I think they should start preparing us while we're playing. I know the focus is like we said, us being the best products as possible on the field, on the court, on the track. But like, I think they need to look at us as their kids and think, okay, well, if this was my child and when they finish, how prepared are they to be an individual? How confident are they in who they are outside of their sport to function in the world and to be bigger than themselves and to walk in their purpose and to live a life that's not just how well did I perform today? How many numbers did I put up today? Who's doing the post-game interview? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think that was really interesting that you said you knew, and even then, it still wasn't what you thought.
Exactly. And I will say, like, it's such a disservice that I could go into a whole spiel too, but we're student athletes by name, right? But we're not really, like, that scale's like student and then athletes. But even more so, we're souls, like, we're individuals, and that's not tailored to, like you said, like, if you don't have that spiritual place you can go to where you can be seen as like completely out of your body and your skin, like your entity in itself, like, that's a problem. And so, you know, I really value institutions that have that space.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll jump in here. It amazes me that not all programs, I guess, are preparing some student athletes to, you know, once they leave. You know, if you're a senior, or even if you know, if you're gonna play in the NBA or WNBA, or, you know, any at a professional level, at some point, you know, it's gonna end. You know, whether it's due to an unfortunate injury, or, you know, your speed isn't there anymore. Your skills just don't meet the top of the competition. So I guess my question is, what can we do to make that change? What can we do to make sure these kids that are right behind you guys, because, you know, we're all about the same age, but are right behind you guys, are in this graduating class, or in next year's graduating class, or they're freshmen now? Like, how can we make sure that we're taking care of these kids, so when they get out, okay, I'm going to be a doctor, but if not, it's okay. You know, like, how can we better prepare these next phase of student athletes?
I would say just, or at least for me, with the ones that I'm still in contact, and I try to reach out and see how they're doing. How are you doing? Hey, how are you doing? What's next for you? Or what are you planning? Or what internships are you looking into? Or who are you networking with? And things like that. And even then, like, for me, like I said, I'm very religious, and in my faith, like, who are you? You know, what have you been thinking about your purpose? Or what have you been praying for? Or what has God been speaking to you? You know, things like that, so that when they graduate, okay, so what? You don't know what you want to do or what you want to be, but you know who you are. You know where your faith is rooted. You know that although I don't know where I'm going, I know who's in control, and I know it's going to be somewhere that's purposeful, somewhere meaningful, somewhere where I can have impact, somewhere where I'll have joy and peace and comfort. Because at the end of the day, I know people who are 45. Like, there's a mentor of mine, she's like 40, and she's like, oh yeah, you know, I'm still figuring out what I want to be when I grow up, you know? So I think that's okay, but it's a matter of knowing who you are as opposed to what you want to be.
Definitely. And also to jump in on that, I think that schools should take it a little bit more seriously as far as the training of what happens after the sport. You know, we have companies that do draft evaluations that'll tell you, hey, this is what your pro prospectus looks like. We could use the same money to bring in folks to say, hey, these are your skills in the business world. This is what you've covered in college. This is how we can translate you into the business world as well. But I would say that the thing that prevents this in a lot of cases is, hey, our coaches, the meals that they put on their families' table depends on what their student athletes are doing, and the more control that the coaches or institution has over what they're thinking during the season or during the time that they're at the school, it possibly holds an advantage towards the school. But the schools and institutions should not be selfish, and it should actually take a look into that as well.
I'd like to chime in. You guys made amazing points. And I'll always look at this as like systemically. And there are so many issues within college sports in general. And I really see them coming down to the same thing, which is, as athletes, we're exploited. It's the harsh reality. And at the end of the day, as entities, we will never be more valuable than the monetary gains of administration and above. That's what it is. And I know, Haley, you said at the beginning, we're something to be owned. And that's if that's, you don't see that as a problem, we got to wake up, you know what I mean? And I would say until things change from the top, it'll be difficult to see lasting change that trickles down. But really, when it comes down to it, how much are we willing to advocate for ourselves? Are there any alumni associations? You said, is there, alumni U? What alumni are coming around and supporting the other athletes. It really is some sort of unionization and looking after each other like a sisterhood or a brotherhood. And that's something I think we can all do better on. And the conversation I've had with a lot of athlete-owned businesses that are up and coming is there is this divide between teams because of the competitive nature. That's really tough. But Haley, you said network. That's the key to really everything. It really is. And like me, I was kind of thrown out on my butt after my coach got fired. Like, who followed up with me? No one followed up with me. And not saying like there weren't people that cared, but like who was looking out for that? And so many athletes slip through the cracks. And I think it's important that if there's no incentive for the head of the institution to look after us after done, we have to do it ourselves. Seriously, it really comes down to like, no one was there for me, paying it forward. I'm going to be there for someone else. Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's good. I think too, going back to what you said about the top down and it being, like you said, it's a business. And I mean, it's not right, but I can see why they look at us that way because we're an investment. You know, they're investing in our scholarships and our housing and things like that. But even if that's the perspective that they're taking on, okay, well, if I invest in a car, how well am I going to take care of that car? Because eventually I am going to want to pass that car down to my kid, or I'm going to want to sell it off. So just because initially I poured into that investment doesn't mean that I leave it, you know? So I think that if that's the view, like you said, it's not right that they're taking, okay, well, these kids are an investment, but what duty do I have to the world and society to make sure that these kids leave here and go into the world and eventually maybe marry my child or teach my child or come across my child or work with my child to make sure that they're better people, because they're not going to all go pro. And even when they do go pro, that doesn't last, you know?
I think at this point, I think the best, like an effective approach, and it might be our only approach, is accountability. Like, how can we implement policy to hold people accountable? Because I feel like relying on them being a good person is might not work.
Money's involved.
Right. And I that's this hard part about it is I think more accountability in a legal standpoint is due. And the NCAA is a nonprofit. Like, that's the hard part, is like they're supposed to be serving us. And I think the reason they don't think the way you were explaining is because the quick turnover rate, we're an everlasting entity. We're interchangeable. So again, it's like, I'm taking matters into my own hand. How can I follow up with you? How can we take this upon ourselves? Because we're in charge here.
Yeah.
They can't do it without us.
This is true. The NCAA, although it is a nonprofit, for lack of a better term, it's a monopoly. And until there is another entity, and there are things in place that are just not as prominent yet, but until there's another entity that pretty much takes the iron fist away from the NCAA, we may or may not continue to see more of the same. But as we see, as athletes, we see different farm systems starting to pop up where it gives different avenues for athletes, not saying which one is right or wrong, but it will force the NCAA to take a look at themselves and say, hey, are we really doing the best we can by athletes when there are startup corporations that have things in place to take care of the athletes if they do not make it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just to kind of, add to the conversation as the only non-student athlete here, is this something that you, I guess, were aware of like in high school, or did it take an older brother or sister to kind of warn you about what the NCAA is like? Or because I'm sure when you're getting recruited, it's it's very exciting. You go to the school and they show you around, they want you to be a part of their team and success and all these sort of things. When did it change for you when you realized that, I don't know how to finish that thought, I guess, but I guess you guys have all graduated and earned your, your degrees and everything like that, did it take, your time graduating, or did you kind of know, your freshman year, or did it take longer?
For me personally, it's kind of that after that honeymoon phase of after recruitment is over and you get your first camp under you. For instance, I can give you an example. Coming out of high school, before I had went to JUCO, I signed with a school in North Carolina. For the sake of the story, I won't give their name. But when we got there to the campus, I had an idea of what major I was going to be and things of that nature. I got there, they handed me a paper with the classes they wanted me to take, the major that I should be in. And at that point, I was like, whoa, they're just setting me up to just be eligible for the next 4 years, and not necessarily setting me up to be something after I graduate.
Right.
Yeah, I would. Oh, go ahead, Maya. I hate speaking over people. So I would say for me, like you said, when you're going into college, you're caught up in the hype, and then when I think I was the first D1 athlete actually in my family. Yeah, I actually was. So there was no one to essentially, warn me about that.
There, right.
Yeah, and then once you get there and you're grinding between school, staying sane, and trying to make sure you continue to start or make it through practice, you're not thinking about these things, and it wasn't for me really until my senior year when it kind of hit me and I kind of stepped out of it and was like, whoa. And luckily I had another year to do grad school where I was able to step in and really be on the outside looking in, and that's when I was able to start talking to some teammates about it. But prior to that, there wasn't, anyone warning me like, oh, this is what the NCAA is like. And like Rod said, I know athletes at my school who literally, sorry, that's my dog ringing his phone, who literally go through their 4 years and get to the end of their 4 years. And they're like, oh, yeah, I don't have enough credits to graduate, but I had enough credits to be eligible to play, for 4 years. So now I got to stay an extra 2 semesters or extra semester to get my degree. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I've had some people even tell me, like, luckily going in, like, hey, Haley, you want to do finance? Pick your classes. And at the time, we didn't have the best academic advisor. Later on, we got a really good one where that wasn't an issue anymore. But that was a common thing. Kids, basketball athletes weren't graduating on time with him. But they were able to play all season, win or lose,
Wow.
That's a disservice. Like, that seems like, that's not what you signed up for. But my experience is definitely a little bit different. My dad played in college and played a little pro. My older sister played in college and played a little pro. And so, and on top of that, my grandfather, he's a philosopher, and he wrote a book about amateurism, about all of this, called Beyond the White Shadow. So I kind of grew up knowing the realities of this path, but I also saw it as an incredible opportunity to have fun and do something that I was really passionate about. So going in, what was in the back of my head was use them as much as they're about to use you. It's just like how we thought about it. And it wasn't until I was going through it that I understood the extent to which I was being exploited and drained, where I was like, oh my God, no, this is like way deeper than I thought it was going to be. So it still was a shock, even me going in aware. And then, all of a sudden, like, things happen. My senior year, we're like, no, I'm going to have a master's and go to med school. And all of a sudden they're like, sorry, we didn't sign a paper. We agreed to it. You came to the AD office and you saw the new football field about to be built, but there's just not a position for you anymore. And so it really is a disservice to athletes. And I'm just hearing my dad's story about how he had to fight to get his engineering degree and play basketball, like, and dealing with a racist AD, like, that's a lot to deal with. And if you don't have someone teaching you how to fight for your worth and fight for what you deserve, like, what chance do you have? And so the last thing I'll say about it is, when I tried to transfer, my coach blocked me. I felt like I was being trapped in a place that I no longer wanted to be. And it wasn't until I brought family in and we're like, we can go to the press if we need to go to the press. Seriously, it was like to that extent of like, you're trying to keep me here. And that just is an example of like that level of control that they try to have over you, that they can have over you. That's like in the contract they can have over you. So again, like even with all these precautions and the awareness, you really don't know. You really don't know until you're in it.
I think it goes back to what you said, Maya, about having things in place, starting from the top down, because even when you step back, and I try to put myself in other people's shoes, I try to put myself in other people's shoes most of the time. So like, I think even with our coaches and our academic advisors, they're people trying to make a living, feed their families, things like that. So say, for example, the academic advisor, his goal is to make sure we're eligible to play, to keep our coaches happy, right? His goal isn't to make sure that we graduate, or it should be, but ultimately to keep his job and feed his family, he needs to make sure we're in practice, we can get to games, who cares what class we can't take. And then in our coaches' shoes, their goal to keep their jobs, pay for their house, feed their family is to win games. Whether or not, like we said, our athletes have good mental health, or our athletes know who they are, or our athletes are prepared to go into the real world, that's a plus if a coach does that. That's by the grace of God, thank you. But at the end of the day, that does not determine whether or not they get paid and they put food on their table. So obviously, more cases than not, like, so what if I have to block it? So what? I have an athlete whose mental health is out the wall. She's a good player. I'm going to block her. I need her here to win games, and I need to win games to feed my family, you know? So I think, like you said, it goes to the top.
I think the last thing I'll say about that is, like, we've said it a couple times, like, for them to put food on the table. But I don't know about you guys, none of my coaches were, like, on the brink of starvation. Like, they were living in nice houses. They got winning bonuses. Like, it wasn't this big threat, like, I won't eat tonight if I don't, like, wring my players dry.
Right.
It wasn't to that level. Whereas some of my teammates, some of the football players that I knew, like, they were sending the entirety of their checks home because it was life or death for them. And like, that's what I kind of am like, I get it, but I don't, you know, it's not that serious for them. I mean, for them to afford their $100,000 house, but
yeah,
it's like, they're not going to be starving if they exploit us, if they don't exploit us, you know?
Yeah.
Well, to wrap up our last segment, what sort of advice would you guys give to someone who is entering that situation, or becoming a freshman as a student athlete? Would you, I guess, tell them, you know, what to look out for, or, you know, tell them, because obviously being a student athlete is a phenomenal opportunity, and for some, that's how they get their education. And if you're able to get that education and get that degree, but I think for me, like I you know, continue to say, I'm not a student athlete, so a lot of these things are extremely eye-opening to me, which is why I wanted to have these conversations, because I don't know everything that, you know, goes around in sports, right? You know, and neither will all the listeners too. So what advice would you give to somebody who's about to enter I guess college as a student athlete?
For me, I've been talking a lot, so I'm going to try to keep it short. But for me, I love the university. I had a great university, and luckily they had different things that were offered to actually prepare us to network and things like that. I think that what I see a lot of athletes leave there and regret is not taking advantage of those things and not looking for those things. And then if those things aren't offered at your university, just stepping outside of where you are in your situation and realizing this is not my life. No matter how much we say ball is life growing up, it's not. at the end of the day, how well you can dribble and put the ball in the hoop, it's not gonna be your life. It's not gonna always be your livelihood. Even if you go pro, it's not. So taking a step outside of that and viewing life and your college career through those lens, so that, like Maya said, you're not being exploited and you're getting as much out of your university as they're getting out of you.
Well said. Me personally, I would definitely use the anecdote of, use the game and let the game use you, and because those 4 or 5 years can be over and so very quickly, and you may not have anything to show for it in some cases. So to definitely use all the resources that come with being an athlete. Don't get too caught up in your own hype, the school's hype, and for lack of a better term, bet on yourself. There's going to be a lot of times where, obviously you put your faith in your teammates for a team success. But when it comes to your personal success off of the field, the court, you want to bet on yourself.
I agree with what both of you all said. So I'll keep mine really short. Get to know your academic advisors. I went on like 13 visits, and I went on all the visits my sister went on. And my dad is so smart. We would sit and be like, "Where's the athletic advisors?" And we'd sit down and say, "I want to do this. Will you guarantee me that I can do it?" Period. Even if you're planning to go pro, I had a lot of friends that went pro and were able to come back and finish their degrees. And the athletic department figured it out because they did their research. They're like, okay, say I do want to go pro and say I get an injury. Can I come back and get this degree that I want? Like, when you're in that room, have a list of 20 questions and get them all answered. And if you need to, get them in writing. But again, like, bet on yourself. This is about you. Don't get the sauce of lights and the things they feed you seriously, because it's not about that. It's finite. So get to know your athletic advisors or your academic advisors. Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, thank you guys so much for joining. You guys were excellent and all brought different things to the table. Your topics were really well thought out, and I really liked when you guys jumped into other people's topics and created that sort of conversation. So as we wrap up, I have one final question for you guys, and it's more of a lighter side, so we can kind of wrap up on a nice note. Haley, why don't you go ahead and get us started with this question here? So what activity or skill have you picked up since quarantine has begun?
I found myself doing more like DIY projects, like randomly. My sister started doing them, and then now, like, I'll see something, I'm like, oh, I can fix that, or oh, I can make that, and not buy it. So a lot more like DIY projects.
Awesome.
I'll go next.
Okay.
I have been spending as much time as possible outside, especially since the weather's been nice. And I've been walking and trying to support local businesses because I'm like, I could get this French press off of Amazon, or I can like walk down the street, get to know the people in my community, right, and support them, because it's a really, really hard time. And I think that really brings the sense of community and helping each other out. So get outside, get some fresh air, feel the breeze, and also help someone in the community.
Right, what about you?
That's good. For me, it has been learning different ways to apply different cooking skills. I'm a big fan of watching Chopped. So therefore, I'll go to the supermarket, mask on, of course, and find some random objects and try to make food, or I'm trying to make an entire meal out of just these random objects that I would pick up, or just things that are randomly in my pantry. So yeah, cooking has definitely been one of them.
I'll go ahead and finish this out here, and mine's don't laugh too hard, but mine was picking up the Wii and getting really good at Wii bowling again. So if anyone wants to play Wii bowling, I got you. I don't want to brag, but my score was pretty impressive. So I had to stop doing that back on the Xbox. But really, I just want to say thank you guys so much for joining. I think for everyone listening to this, I think you need to appreciate everyone that spoke today. it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability, as we referenced. So thank you guys again for coming on. And if you guys want to drop your handles or anything for people to reach out to you, you guys can go ahead and do that now, if you would like.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. If you want to contact me, you can email me at Clark, CLARK, Haley, HALEY95 @ yahoo.com, or you can just follow me and DM me on Instagram at HAY, HAY.
All right. Rod Symba, the best way to contact me would be through instant messenger. I'm actually not instant messenger. This is AOL. Through DM on IG. That's Rod Symba, RODSYMBA.
Actually, the best way to contact me is AOL IM, so still have it on my desktop. No. If you have any questions that pertains to mental health or getting involved as a mental health advocate, the best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. It's mayamcclendon, no spaces. But you can follow me on my Instagram. I had to pull it up. Maya _AKA _Maja with a J. Changed that recently. But yeah, feel free, ask any questions, and here for anyone or anything.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining us, those listening and those in the panel. For more information on the next episode and continuing episodes, you can go to nickrodriguezpodcast.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.